Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Destiny comic review. So, issue 2 of Fall of Osiris has just been released, and here it is on Bungie.net. Link to this in the description to where you can obviously read it for free online yourself. But we're going to go through it here and discuss this second issue. Very quickly before we begin, general thoughts on the issue are that I think overall it's a really good kind of general, much more, I suppose, directed look into the lore relating to, like, obviously the current DLC that we're in. Let down, I think, by some pretty notable kind of continuity errors or inconsistencies that don't just contradict, like, Grimoire cards, but, like, directly contradict stuff in the game. And given that they made a statement kind of, I think, last week or earlier this week to really clarify that, like, okay, the Grimoire cards are sort of like folklore, legends sort of stuff, but the comics are canon, the games are canon, it doesn't look good, especially when this is comic number 2 and there's already, like, huge issues related to the game, not just the other Grimoire that you have. But anyway, let's get into this. So here's the cover and the credits page, but we move into the first panel. And it's an interesting one here. Now, obviously, by the end of this issue, we realize that this is Ikora more or less telling us this story from just prior to the Curse of Osiris DLC properly taking place, or the very beginning of that DLC. But we get the idea that at the end of this, at the end of issue 1, Osiris is reluctantly kind of turned into some sort of a prophet, and the speaker had banned the book that he basically had nothing to do with. But people believe in his teachings and are doubting the speaker's teachings, which is more focused on the traveler. So that's the kind of main conflict at play here. And we see that over these next couple of panels. He basically was wearing different clothing so that he can actually get some work done, and that he doesn't like the speaker and the speaker doesn't like him, but he is the Vanguard commander, so he's in an important position. And yeah, we see Ikora here is kind of playing a more middle ground kind of situation where she sees, like, why the speaker is an important position, but she also gets that, like, the speaker is ignoring kind of some valid points that Osiris is saying. You know, he does lead the city and it needs defending. And yeah, the speaker actually, I think this is the most valid point that he actually has of, like, oh, you've come here to do your job, have you? And Osiris isn't really acknowledging the fact that he's sort of been missing from the position that he's in, and obviously as Vanguard commander he has to actually, like, command the Vanguard, but since he's doing all this kind of research on his own and is out investigating all this stuff, it's leaving the city without a Vanguard commander, and it means that Ikora has to step up and more or less be the acting warlock kind of Vanguard mentor. And it's something that needs to be addressed as they kind of progress forward, that they have to do something about this because they need a commander. And obviously Zavala is somewhere in or around here, so, you know, let's get him on board as soon as possible, more or less. And you know, you really see how, I suppose, intense this rivalry is. I think that's one thing that this comic gets across quite nicely, is just the issues between the speaker and Osiris. As we can see here, as it has become abundantly clear, you are incapable of doing yours without me. And you know, they're basically on the verge of coming to blows, except obviously as far as we're aware, the speaker isn't really a combat guy, and Osiris is obviously established to be one of the best guardians, so it wouldn't really be much of a fight, but this is more of a political fight here. And Osiris makes a point here, you know, we're all here to work. Ikora has covered in my absence, but you ignored both her advice and her warnings. Because of that, the Twilight Gap has become vulnerable to attack. I recommend we. And so this is obviously setting up that the Battle of the Twilight Gap, one of the bigger battles, engagements in the lore of Destiny, is more or less about to happen, which is a huge battle where a lot of Guardians kind of become legend and so on. And obviously it's going to lead to a lot of stuff happening. But he also mentions here that the speaker's basically ignoring Ikora and how actually solid she is, because the weird thing with the speaker in this thread is that he seems to be aware that like he needs Osiris, because even though he doesn't respect him completely, he's aware of how powerful he is, and that he has a kind of aura around him where like people do like follow him. But he's not giving any of that credit to Ikora, who is actually kind of fulfilling the role that Osiris has kind of left. And you can see here that even people that like are close to the speaker are like, you know, the speaker dares address the Great One in such a way, you know, heresy. And he doesn't like this, because obviously the speaker is all about the kind of religion of the traveler, basically. And then Osiris doesn't believe that as much, and kind of wants to deal with the more direct threats that he sees as being in play. I do not solicit nor welcome the followers, but if they subscribe to my teachings, perhaps that's a sign that your understanding of the traveler is at best incomplete. And we see that he does not like this. I speak for the traveler, none understand it as I do, which is all the more interesting given that, again, like I said with the issue 1 review, we know from the base Destiny 2 story that, you know, he speaks for the traveler, but this traveler never spoke to him. So what is this understanding? Like, who is this kind of person? Like, I still want to know kind of more the backstory of the speaker as a character. And then speaker, go on, tell us of the Vex. Because obviously Osiris realizes that the Vex are becoming a problem, and he's going to start to, over the course of the next couple of panels, explain to us why they're a problem. And how the speaker is very dismissive of a lot of this stuff. He's dismissive of the fact that the Twilight Gap is undefended, more or less. He's dismissive of the fact that the Vex are, you know, inconsequential, saying they're a race of robots, incapable of imaginative thinking, forever reliant on the same strategies that failed them 1,000 times before. For one, obviously not realizing that they're not just robots, that the Vex are in fact just the radiolarian fluid, the white stuff, they're not the robots themselves. And then ignoring the fact that they have all these other amazing things that we don't know about. So Osiris references the Vault of Glass here. And obviously it's sort of stuff that if you don't get what the Vault of Glass is, I can sort of see why the speaker kind of dismisses it as like, yeah, but it's all contained within that vault. But he says the Vex are not, because obviously if they can build the vault and the powers that the vault has can happen, what happens is they begin to expand that out and build other vaults and almost try and turn the whole planet into vaults effectively. But he moves on and says, you know, they'll never be happy with a pocket of our universe. They're building a new type of simulation engine if they succeed. That's obviously the Infinite Forest from the Osiris DLC that he's talking about. And obviously the speaker doesn't see anything about these simulations and what they mean or anything like that. But he then says they're already able to simulate citizens, and I believe they intend to begin simulating guardians. Tell me, speaker, what happens when they simulate someone from the largest structure down to the smallest particle? It's impossible. They perfectly produce simulated guardians that can kill and resurrect 1,000,000 times until they know the real deal better than we know ourselves. They simulate the traveler's light and they use it to kill us all. And this is very, very interesting given what the new DLC tells us about Saint 14, and that basically the reason Saint 14 is, you know, I suppose quote unquote dead in the present timeline is because of exactly this, that the Infinite Forest managed to simulate him specifically well enough, or, you know, tackle him by, you know, so many simulations on his light that they eventually did manage to defeat him, even though it was a huge process to make that happen. And given the connection of Saint 14 to the speaker, it's, you know, a situation of the speaker ignoring something Osiris said, which led to the death of someone the speaker, I assume, actually cares about. But then we cut over to Ikora. We also have Shax in the background. He has his 2 horns here, which is... I can't really remember in the lore where he lost his other horn. It might have been at the Twilight Gap, so it might be perfectly fine here. But we see some Guardians arguing about, you know, the fact that some are on the Speaker's side, some are on Osiris's side, and that's what's happening here in this argument. And we see some, you know, differences between the classes and of Guardian coming into play here. All Titans know it's punching, and one more word Warlock, just one more move. We see a reference up there at the top to the future War Cult as well, which is pretty cool. Where else here? Oh yeah, here Shax steps in. This is probably the biggest continuity. No, actually, not. This isn't the biggest continuity error, but it's. I think it's one of them, in that we more or less know that the Crucible was like properly formed after the Battle of the Twilight Gap, which doesn't seem to have happened yet. So he's talking about it here like it is a thing when he hasn't actually made that yet. So it's an interesting one for sure, but they could maybe get out of it, but it's not ideal that this sort of stuff is happening. But I like that he's talking about this to try and get them to be better Guardians. We fight to prepare for the greater battles that are to come, and war is coming to our city. But before we could face our enemies, we had to settle the war amongst ourselves. So, unless they're basically saying here that, okay, he didn't form the Crucible after the Twilight Gap, he formed it when he realized that the battle around Twilight Gap was going to happen, and that a lot of the Guardians weren't in the best fighting shape or something like that. I could sort of see them stretching it to make it that, but it still, I think, goes against what we do know from before. Then we move into the consensus. I think this is the first consensus meeting, which we haven't... We've obviously heard about this through the Grimoire, but we've never really seen it. So you can see a lot of characters here. I think that's Saint 14. We also have Zavala in the background. Shax is here. Saladin is here. And then there's Andal Brask, I believe. But yeah, we have a lot of the characters, and then obviously they're the representatives of the Dead Orbit, New Monarchy, and Future War Cult, which make up the consensus, and the speakers in the middle, of course. And we see here that he's bringing up the idea that this meeting is for the protection of the city, and someone has abandoned us, and he questions where Osiris is, that he's not even here for this important meeting, which I see his point here, obviously, the fact that they call a consensus meeting and Osiris isn't even here. But it's obviously left for Ikora to be the one to sort of speak up to him, as she's sort of getting subtly insulted here by the speaker. And he says, I know what they say of the great Osiris. He's a hero, a warrior, a guardian, a scholar, but I speak for the traveller and I know the truth. Osiris is an apostate, a deserter, a coward, a traitor. And he starts to turn the crowd against him. Osiris is a viper, a cancer. We must cut him out. So he wants to get rid of him. Shax disagrees, and Ikora knows she has to speak up. And I kind of like what she says here. You say Osiris is a coward speaker, but would a coward stand alone against not only the forces of darkness, but the very people he's trying to protect? That what she's saying here is that, like, Osiris, in being fine to kind of separate himself and almost make himself somewhat of a villain to a lot of the people, shows that you can't call him a coward, because he's willing to be out on his own and make these kind of decisions. You say Osiris has abandoned us, and yet even now he's working to help us, even if we don't understand what he's doing. Not making the best case for the fact of, like, I suppose, why he should stay Vanguard Commander, but that effectively banishing him from the city just because he's causing issues with your religion, it's not really the most ideal thing to do, given the positives that he does bring, that he was given the position of Vanguard Commander for a reason, in that he obviously is skilled enough and at a base level has some leadership qualities worthy of this, in that obviously we don't know how long he's been the Vanguard Commander, but obviously at the time there wasn't anyone better than him. And he says, but we asked him to lead us, but then we asked him to do more, tell us the future, save us, think for us. So, and she's just saying like that she believes in him, even if everyone else doesn't. And the truth is this: we won't survive without him. And he just basically dismisses her, which obviously makes him come across much more like the villain. Have to remove this heresy from the city. Everyone wants him out. And he then comes in and says, Sagira and I will leave the city willingly. Later, haters. And that's it. They threw him out. The problem, the continuity error, is that in the DLC, some of the dialogue somewhere in the game directly says, Sagira I think says to Ikora that, part of the issue between them that they kind of have to fix is that, according to Sagira, Ikora was like a leader of the group that helped to exile Osiris, but this comic here directly says that he exiled himself. And right now, unless they go further with the story, Ikora has actually stepped up to defend him from this even happening, and hasn't made any sort of agreement with the fact that he should be exiled from the city. You can see the way she's saying, and we threw him out, and that obviously she sort of blames herself for not really being able to convince anyone to kind of keep him in the city. But it is a pretty bad continuity there to have, given that this is meant to be the lead-in comic to kind of further establish who Osiris is, so that the DLC makes a little bit more sense, yet it directly creates this continuity error. So that's just not good at all. How do you contradict that? I maybe get them not having it fit in with every single grimoire card that references Osiris, because some of them are quite vague and very much down to interpretation, but this is really clear. The comic shows this thing, the dialogue in the game shows another, and it doesn't feel like there's any way to kind of connect them unless they tell more of the story. But it seems like, given how this issue ends, this is kind of it for the comics covering the Osiris stuff. But we obviously cut to the fact that decades later, I still don't know what he meant. And nobody has seen or heard from him since his banishment, what he's been doing or why, if he's still on her side, as she's handed a box, and the answers are probably going to come from Sagira's ghost shell here. And she basically asked the question, what do you kind of hide inside you? With the idea that she was given this is part of the first mission, I think, of the Osiris DLC, where we find Sagira's shell. And I don't know if this means we're going to get an issue 3, because obviously the way the comics are titled and kind of numbered is that okay, it's issue 1 and 2, but it doesn't really feel like this is necessarily issue 1 of Fall of Osiris. It's just that issue 1 is one part of Fall of Osiris, and then issue 2 is just the second Destiny comic, which happens to be Fall of Osiris, when they could cover more or less anything, I think. I am interested to see where they go. They could, I suppose, go further if they wanted to, in that they could switch over to what Osiris is doing. That probably makes a little bit of sense, to cover exactly what he's been doing since his banishment, or I suppose covered the story with the speaker of what they continue to do after this. Potentially show the origins of Brother Vance and the whole cult of Osiris stuff that properly develops after this, how the trials of Osiris come about and so on. But I'm not sure if they'll do that. I think they might want to move on to telling other stories, but we'll have to wait and see. Of course, there's still, I suppose, some Saint 14 stuff to happen as well. I suppose, given that they referenced the Twilight Gap, that would be a cool thing to do as well, if they just showcased some of that battle, and I suppose Zavala coming more into his own, and him being given the title of Vanguard Commander, Ikora officially becoming the Warlock Mentor. I don't know exactly the timing on when Cade 6 becomes the Hunter Vanguard, but that bet, the Vanguard Dare, has to happen at some point. So I'd like to see the comics cover a lot of that stuff, and it feels like there's the option, in that it seems like they're directly setting up some big stuff happening. But I'm okay with whatever way they go. Once it's interesting, whether they continue the Osiris stuff or move on to the Battle of the Twilight Gap, I just want more comics. I want them to do novels, and I want more lore in the game for sure. But yeah, that's been my review of issue 2 of Curse of Osiris. as I said, outside of the continuity errors, which shouldn't really be happening given the amount of proper content we have, I did like the core of what the books are doing, and that they're making it much clearer, a lot easier way for people to get into the lore of Destiny and understand what's going on here. The dynamic between the Speaker and Osiris was very well done, and then later seeing Ikora step up as like somewhat of a leader to defend Osiris but also understand where the Speaker's coming from, I thought worked pretty well as well. So I'm excited for issue 3 to see what it covers. But yeah, in the comments let me know what your thoughts were on issue 2, and do you think issue 3 will continue things on, or will they do something different? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.